The critics of the military operations that liberated Iraq from Saddam's reign of terror would like to have had us view that experience through the lens of focusing on the Abu Ghraib prison incidents rather than the broader picture and the broader view. I will submit that the American soldiers and the American military and our American intelligence security personnel have conducted themselves by and large extraordinarily honorably throughout history. And I think it's a disservice to focus on the exceptions as narrow as they in fact are in the breadth of the history of this country. And so this question emerges in my mind, and I ask, I think, first from Mr. Sands, who may be more objective about this because of his country of nationality and origin. But is there an example throughout the history of the United States of America, and I'll take us back to 1776, where the United States has been in a conflict against an enemy, militarily, cultural, or just an enemy, where our enemy took a more moral posture towards our soldiers and our combatants than, maybe our spies and intelligence people, than we have ourselves. The posture of the United States vis-a-vis our enemies, are we viewed, is there a historical exception where, on balance, for the conflict that you might choose, that the enemy has taken a stand superior in moral authority than the United States?
So I'm afraid I'm not an expert on military history, and I'm therefore not able to answer that question beyond a number of general observations. Firstly, I would agree with your observation that the United States has been a global leader in relation to these issues, both historically and also in relation to more recent conflicts, and also in relation to the vast majority of practice in relation to current conflicts. I've had the opportunity to meet a very large number of serving members of the United States military who have been involved in Afghanistan, who have been involved in Iraq, and who are involved in other parts of the world. And I leave with an enormously positive impression of the role that they have played. The story that I've told is not a story about things going wrong in relation to the military. Okay. It's a story in relation to political appointees. And
in the interest of time, I want to concede your point that you're about to make and acknowledge that the breadth of this is it's not a broad criticism, it is very narrow. We agree.
I believe it is narrow, but its narrowness does not diminish its importance because of the reason.
And I'll concede that point to you, and that is what we're examining here. And I thank you for your response. And I turn to Ms. Cohn. You're advocated for the gaining the trust of the person who would be questioned. And as one who is every day involved in this business of folks gaining my trust, we are very resistant to that tactic here in Congress because there are confidences that we must maintain, or our leverage and influence is significantly diminished. And I would ask if you could point out a case where there has been a successful interrogation of enemy personnel by gaining trust that has saved lives in the fashion that has been illustrated, in the equivalency of lives in intelligence that might be comparable to that of Ranking Member Trent Franks, as he talked about the waterboarding, three incidents of waterboarding. Can you eclipse that in your historical knowledge of the gaining trust of the enemy?
Thank you for that question, Mr. King. It's my understanding that when Saddam Hussein was in custody after the United States came in and took over that country, that he was treated with kindness, and in fact he provided a very rich source of information for the people who were interrogating him. So that would be the example that comes to mind. But I want to say one other thing.
Is that quantified?
Pardon me?
Is that quantified? I mean, I understand that too, but have we quantified the intelligence gains from Saddam?
Well,
in a fashion that measures up against the intelligence gains that are referenced by Mr. Franks in his opening statement?
Well, the problem is that the intelligence gains that were referenced by Mr. Frank in his opening statements are also not verifiable because of top secrecy, and quite frankly, given the number of misrepresentations coming from the high levels of the Bush administration, I don't have great confidence in the statements that come from that administration. But I want to say one other thing, and that is that I agree with you that our soldiers have been admirable, our troops in this conflict. And we're not talking about our troops. We're talking about interrogators, many of whom are mercenaries, who are following policies that come from the top of the highest levels of government, of this government. And we're not talking just about an isolated case of Abu Ghraib. We're talking about torture and cruel, inhuman, or degrading treatment and punishment that has come at Guantanamo, in Iraq, in Afghanistan, and in the CIA blast. This is not just an isolated instance.
If I might, and it focuses back on the statement made by Mr. Sands, and as you illustrated the IRA and the battle. By the way, I want to say I agree with you, and we shouldn't call it a war on terror. I think that's a misnomer. But you made the statement that the IRA, the Irish Republican Army, that conflict was extended by 15 to 20 years because of the, I believe it was humiliation that was imposed upon some of them that extended it because of the outrage. And now I would make the point to you that wallowing in self-guilt as a nation and bringing hearings before this Congress and pumping this into the media constantly when we've identified that these are narrow, very narrow, exceptional circumstances, and our knowledge on it isn't complete, that it extends the outrage. And this panel and this testimony and those things that supplement it across this media also extend the outrage and may well be extending this global war against these people whom we won't call terrorists, we'll call them Islamic jihadists. Mr. Sands?
I'd very much like to respond to that, sir. I mean, I'd be very happy to share with the committee, it's not my area of expertise, but I do have access to some of the information of the views of the British military and the British political circles as to the consequences of using the so-called 5 techniques on the IRA. And in fact, the situation, I can segue into your question, sir.
But I want to know if your testimony extends the outrage.
But Mr. Rivkin said he didn't believe that any of the lawyers involved in the UK techniques were ever hauled up before court. But the United Kingdom was. And what enabled the United Kingdom to move on in that relationship and to get closure on that terrible period were judgments of the European Commission on Human Rights and the European Court on Human Rights. And my hope, sir, would be that either this committee or some other committee is able to bring closure to this issue by accepting that errors were made and allowing the country to move on. Because the consequence of not going down that route is that there will be investigations and possibly prosecutions abroad as to the failure of the United States to have acted. So it's about finding closure and moving on.
I would ask unanimous consent to allow Mr. Rifkin to answer that question.
Very briefly, thank you. Very briefly, I want the record to show that none of his senior British officials were prosecuted in connection with any of the activities, including assassination, which, if the laws would not apply, would be legal killings of IRA operatives. So there are different, even if you assume the importance of bringing closure to that, there's a right way of bringing closure, there's a wrong way of bringing closure, and criminal investigations and prosecutions for the next 2 decades ain't the right way to bring closure. And that's not what Britain has done, that's not what Israel has done.
Mr. Chairman, may I add one comment to this? And that is that the government of the United Kingdom at that time made a clean breast of the 5 techniques and publicly acknowledged that it had been using the 5 techniques.
Very briefly, sir, it is not accurate to say that no individuals faced individual sanction or responsibility, and I will be pleased to provide the committee with detailed information as to what has happened in the United Kingdom.
I yield back.
Thank you.